Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Route 281 podcast. Our first episode is with Dr. Bill Croushore. He's a large animal veterinarian in Somerset County, Pennsylvania. He is the owner of White Oak Vet Clinic in Somerset, PA. He is a former newspaper columnist for the Somerset Daily American, and he's also an author. We are thankful to get to spend some time with him and get to know him a little bit better. So we hope you enjoy this episode. Please like and subscribe. We have many more interesting guests on the way. We hope you enjoy. Okay, we should be live. Okay, episode number 1, Dr. Bill Croushore.
So are we live?
You're live. Yep, we are live. That's your audio 1, I'm audio 2.
Cool. All right.
So, everybody gets an introduction, and I don't know if I have it all correct or not, but
I'll correct you.
Yeah. Dr. Bill Croushore, doctor of veterinary medicine,
Yep.
husband, father,
Yep.
Christian,
Uh-huh.
newspaper columnist, former, author,
Yes.
and self-described rumen enthusiast.
I am.
And you can explain what that is a little bit later once we get into it. But thanks for being here.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
And there's Simon. I figured he'd show up sooner or later. So I'll start you out with a gift.
Cool.
So you are the first one to get that hat.
Cool. Okay.
The only people that will have those hats will be people that have been on this podcast. So you don't have to wear it now, but it could be a conversation starter whenever somebody says, "What is that?"
It's going to look better than my other hat. Oh, yeah. There we go. Nice.
Yeah, looks good on you. Yeah, let's go. I just appreciate you doing this. This is a new thing for me, but what I wanted to do was get local people doing cool things, and what you do with your practice, I think, is interesting. I Googled the top 10 occupations that kids want to do when they're little, and veterinarian comes up in the top 10.
Yeah.
And you talk a little bit about that in your book, like the reasons for wanting to be a vet.
Be careful what you wish
Yeah.
for.
So we'll get to that too, but The Majestic Cow is your latest book, right?
Yes.
And I read it, and it's good. And
Thank
so
you.
a lot of my questions come from the book, and some don't. But I thought you did a really good job of talking about farming and and I was kind of surprised when I read it. There was a lot about farmers, which hits close to home to me. I grew up on a dairy farm, as you know. Worked on a dairy farm as late as about 10 years ago, before we moved out here. Actually purchased a truck from your practice whenever I had one of your Ford Rangers.
Okay.
Yeah. That had the vet smell in it still.
Oh, yeah.
Which, you know,
it always will.
which was okay with me because I was used to it. So,
B vitamins and cow manure.
you can just pull that over to you a little bit.
Okay. Oh, that's different.
Yeah. Can you hear yourself a little better now?
I can.
Okay. Yeah, so I had that Ford Ranger for, I don't know how long I had that, but when I moved out here, that's the vehicle that I had. Because when I was at the farm, I didn't need my own vehicle because we had a farm truck.
What color?
It was the silver one.
Okay. That might have been mine.
I think it was.
Yeah.
And yeah. So we got a new office now.
Yeah, we just purchased a place on High Point up above the Turnpike Exchange in. I think we finalized it in July, and we moved in August.
And I was there, and it's very nice.
It is awesome.
Yeah, I bet you guys are happy.
Very happy. Very happy. Even though we've had a very challenging winter, the ability to pull our vehicles inside to stock them in the trailer, to stock the IVF trailer, it is very nice.
Stock. Simon, be quiet. Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah.
You guys got a lot of space.
I think the building, the complex is about 6,800 square feet, and we don't need but half of it. So we're in the process of finding a renter
Yeah.
for some of the space, and then we're still going to have storage, and yeah, so it's been much needed.
Yeah, Dan showed me around a little bit whenever I was there, and
he
showed me the first spot.
I don't know how we fit all that stuff in that old building.
Oh yeah,
I don't know how we did it. It was like we broke some laws of physics.
Yeah,
there's no way.
Yeah, because I was like, this place is huge.
Yeah,
and you don't even need all of it, so you're going to rent a couple spots out.
Yeah,
that's good. Well, he showed me the little room next to your office, like the one in the middle.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I was like, this would make a great podcast studio.
Yeah.
I told him that. He's like, well, this is what we have rented. So he showed me the other one. I said, this might kill two birds with one stone.
Yeah.
But anyway, without further ado, let's get to the interview part, if you're all right with that. So, if you don't mind, just a little bit about how you grew up and how was farming or agriculture a part of your childhood?
So I grew up in Westmoreland County in a little town called Roughdale, which is not even a blinking light. It's just sort of a school and a convenience store. And we lived about 2 miles outside of there on my family's farm, I guess, for lack of a better word. My dad had a background in agriculture. He ended up going to Delaware Valley College before it was Delaware Valley University. Graduated there in the mid-'60s, went on to West Virginia University, got a master's degree in ruminant nutrition, went back to Doylestown at Del Val and taught for a few years. And my dad, being the selfless person that he is, my mother and he wanted my brother and I to know our grandparents when we grew up. So he gave up all his agriculture and moved back home looking for an opportunity to work in agriculture, but it never materialized. He ended up working in a rock quarry for about 3 years before he ended up hooking on with Anchor Hocking in Connellsville with the management position, making bottle caps, essentially. But the seed was kind of planted in my head that I wanted to work in ag. My uncle, his brother, had the family farm. He raised cattle and some cash crop, hay mostly, and some ear corn. But he had a small herd of mama cows, and he would do the cow-calf thing when I was still in school. And I would help him, obviously, baling hay back there in the mid-'80s. That's what all the country kids did. They baled hay to make money, and so that's what we did. When he and his wife, my aunt, would go away, I'd feed the cattle and tend them, and I ended up working for him on a part-time basis while I was in high school for a while. And I remember one day, to this day I remember it, I was raking hay. It was first crop, middle of June. It was a day or two after a cold front came through, and air was crisp, and I was on a tractor raking hay, and just a beautiful day. And I thought, man, I could do this for a living. This doesn't suck. And I started thinking about ways I could work in ag. And this is the mid-'80s, and the steel industry was decentralizing in Pittsburgh, and unemployment was a primary concern. So I thought about the ag thing. I ended up almost going to Del Val for agriculture, but didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I ended up settling on pharmacy. I went to Duquesne in Pittsburgh, got a pharmacy degree, and halfway through, I ended up with a job on the south side of Pittsburgh in a retail pharmacy. And I was about 2 weeks into that job. After my studies, I come home from work. It's about 9:30. I'm sitting in my dorm room, just dejected, thinking I'm eating a can of pork and beans, thinking, man, I can't do this for the rest of my life. I'm halfway through pharmacy school already. What am I going to do? And I had a biology professor my freshman year who was a veterinarian, and he went into academia. And I thought, I'm going to go talk to Dr. Subhas in the morning. So I did. I went. I said, look, what do I got to do to be a veterinarian? He said, well, first of all, you better go shadow veterinarian so that you don't make the same mistake twice. So he hooked me up with a guy in Gibsonia, and I'd go up there every Tuesday. He had a small animal practice. And I just watch him, I just follow him around. And I thought, the clinical stuff is really cool. But I still like large animals. So eventually I found a couple other large animal practices to hang around. And I made the decision to finish pharmacy school, get my degree, and then move to Blacksburg, Virginia to establish residency to try and get into Virginia Tech. And that's what I did.
Okay.
And I don't regret even a second of it.
And that's where you ended up going to school?
Yep.
Virginia Tech.
I started in 1993, graduated in 1997.
And that's in Blacksburg.
Right.
I worked for a company for a short period of time in Radford.
Oh, yeah, pretty close.
They were out of Radford, but I didn't work down there. I was only ever at their shop one time, so I know where that is. But
my first pharmacy job was in Radford.
So that's the Hokies, right?
Yeah, I had to work for a year to establish my residency,
Okay.
So I went down and worked as a pharmacist in Radford for a year before I started.
So you found a large animal vet in Virginia?
Virginia? Yeah, Dr. Thatch Winslow.
Okay.
He had a equine bovine practice. That was pretty much all he did was cattle and horses. And I would get a day off every week with my schedule, and I'd spend it with him. And we'd ride around the back roads of Southwest Virginia and treat cows and treat horses, and yeah.
And you were all in at that point?
I was all in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you got your veterinary degree from Virginia Tech and never looked back?
Right.
Okay. And then at what point did you get back to Somerset County or PA?
So I knew I wanted to get back to Pennsylvania because I knew I wanted my kids eventually to know their grandparents when they grew up.
Yeah.
So I took a job in Edinburgh in northwest Pennsylvania right out of school at Canberra Veterinary Hospital. It was a mixed practice at the time, so I did half large animal, half small animal. And the companion animal was fine. It taught me a lot. I love food animal.
Yeah.
And the dairy economy up there at the time was really tanking. And after about 4 years, I saw the writing on the wall, and the opportunity at White Oak presented itself, and we made the decision to move to Somerset County.
Okay, so at that time, was it just Dr. Welsh at White Oak?
At the time, it was Dr. Welch was the owner, and there was another associate, Dr. Jack Runk, and he had been there for 2 or 3 years, and I was the third. I was the third vet.
Okay. Yeah, just for the listeners, my association with White Oak Vet Clinic was because my family's dairy farm,
right,
which you serviced for years, and yeah, I knew Dr. Welsh from then, and then it's where I got to know you,
yeah,
and your partner.
And I moved here in 2002, right after my son was born.
Okay.
That was a long time ago.
And how old is Nolan, right?
Yeah, Nolan is 23 now, I think.
And are either him or your daughter going to be a veterinarian?
No. My daughter, Benna, she's going to be a nurse.
Okay.
And my son, Nolan, is an actuary.
Yeah.
Which suits him fine.
And that is not with birds, correct?
That's what he said. He said, I want to be an actuary. I was like, what the hell is an actuary?
But for listeners, what is an actuary?
They figure out probability of risk for insurance companies so the insurance companies can determine premiums, and they deal with life insurance and annuities and things that I don't even know what they are.
I don't know what podcast you listen to, but recently was listening to Sean Ryan's show, and he had on Gary Brecka. Okay. You're familiar with him, but he started out in that field.
Okay.
But he human health biology, guru. Anyway, that's what he started out in. But So you talk a little bit in your book about the reasons for becoming a vet, and a love for animals probably isn't one of them.
It's not.
Yeah, and so could you explain a little bit about your experience and why that is? Because I think that, if somebody, and I've even said to one of my kids, like, "Oh, you love animals, maybe you'll be a vet one day." So I've committed to saying that. So what is the misconception, or what,
So I will say that I have a healthy like for animals. I especially food animals. I see them as a means to a meal. I like my steak. And animals are, they are, to me, evidence of God's providence. But they are still not the same as people. And if I was on the admissions committee for a veterinary school and I asked a candidate why they wanted to go to veterinary school and they told me I love animals, I would immediately disqualify them, because the animals are not the focus. They're the clinical focus, but the relational focus has to be the client. And you have to like people. You have to be able to interact with people. You have to be able to communicate with people to fix your patient. But if the animal is if it is your focus, if it is, then you lose sight of the client.
And the end goal,
Yeah,
sometimes isn't always in the animal's best interest. I mean, I guess whenever you're making a decision as a farmer, when you have a food animal like a dairy cow or something, it's maybe to keep the cow or not.
it's an economic decision.
Yes, correct.
It's always an economic decision. Now, that's not the case with companion animals. Economics can play a role in it. If you have a 12-year-old dog, as I do, who may blow out a cruciate ligament, do you decide to pay $5,000 to get a cruciate ligament fixed in a dog that might be around for another year? That's an economic, straight up, it's an economic decision.
Yeah.
I have a couple golden retrievers. I really like my golden retrievers. My golden retriever, he's the best dog ever. I'm going to miss him a lot when he's gone.
Yeah.
But he's going to die someday,
Yeah.
And that's the difference between, humans and animals, is we have hope that there's something more for us after we die. When they die, they're gone.
Yes. And so God gave man dominion over his creation, animals being one of them.
Yeah.
And so.
Not to lessen their impact. Again, they are evidence of God's providence, I think. But they are still evidence of God's providence. They are not to the level that people are.
Right, correct. My kids show dairy cattle now, and they'll when they start training that calf, till they get it, if it's a March calf, even some of the older ones, yearling.
Yeah.
By the time they get to the fair, which, if they start in the spring and fair rolls around at late August, they are laying with that cow in the pack. The calf's head wrapped around its body, resting on theirs. And I have pictures of all three of them laying on one brown Swiss.
Yep.
And it's like, you sure that's not a companion animal? They definitely love those animals, and the animal seems to love them. And I don't know what that relationship is like for the cow.
There's definitely a bond. Definitely a bond, and volumes have been written about the human-animal bond, and it is true with dogs. Probably less so with cats. The difference between a dog and a cat.
Yeah.
A dog sees its owner as who is this thing that feeds me and protects me and takes care of me and loves me. They must be a god. And a cat looks at their owner and says, what is that thing that feeds me and protects me and cares for me? I must be a god.
Yeah. A cat will wait around. I heard a cat will, if you die, a cat will eat you.
Yeah.
But the dog won't.
No.
I just have a dog. We do have a barn cat. He does a good job with the barn. He keeps the mice away. But
there is a bond between cattle and some cattle.
Yeah.
Ones that are handled
and that seems to be the difference.
Yeah.
Because you take a 2-year-old heifer and bring her into a barn that's never been handled, and she's as afraid of you as anything.
Right.
But one that's been handled,
yeah,
it's a completely different story. I mean, they just love those kids.
And I work with a lot of embryo donors, and some of these they're like pets.
Yeah. So what is the education career path for somebody that wants to go into veterinary medicine? And you can specifically large animal vet, since that's what you're...
So the requirements getting to veterinary school are the requirements getting to veterinary school. And the colleges say that they give preference to people who want to do large animal, but I'm not convinced that that's really true. It probably was when I went in. That's probably how I got in. I think I was part of a pretty weak class, but you got to have. It's pretty competitive to get in, and your grade point average probably in college has to be somewhere around a 3.5, and you have to have a lot of science and excel at science. And clinical veterinary medicine is a lot of science, and it's science and problem solving. So if you're thinking about going to veterinary school, obviously, find out the requirements for whatever school or schools you're looking to apply to, but concentrate on science. Animal science is a pretty good field to get your undergraduate degree in, because it's got a lot of science, and then there's a good bit of agriculture in animal science too. But in my undergraduate degree in pharmacy, I think it met the requirements for most of the veterinary schools. I had to take an extra physics class, and I had to take a genetics class, but it qualified me. Now, pharmacy today is a 6-year doctorate degree, so nobody would go to pharmacy school today and
to
Right.
become a veterinarian. But somebody that wants to be a veterinarian should be very serious about it. I mean, with similar requirements, similar level of seriousness as if you wanted to be a doctor. You're not.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A doctor in human.
Right.
Yeah. Physician. So you own your own practice, along with one other partner?
Yeah, Dan's is my partner. I bought into White Oak. Oh gosh, it's probably been about 15 years now. And Dan bought in maybe about 7 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, so being a business owner is it's a whole different set of responsibilities.
It adds a whole nother level too.
Yeah.
Like anything else, I guess. Working for a contractor or being the contractor yourself, you take on another set of responsibilities.
Sure.
So it's similar for a veterinarian. Now you're responsible for the employees, and you're not just So, was that a risk for you? Did you see it as a risk? Or you like, I know this is what I want to do. I want to be a part of a practice.
I knew that's what I wanted to do. I thought it would have been more risky not to buy in. And I asked Dr. Welch, when we were exploring the process, and he set the practice price, and we looked at what the extra income would be, and it wasn't too far different from what I was paying in. It was a little bit more, but so why do you want to sell me part of this practice if you're going to lose that income and what I'm paying you isn't going to, it's going to make up some of it, but it's not going to make up all of it. He said, because I don't want you to leave the county. It's basically a way to lock in your associate long term, indefinitely, whatever.
Okay.
And he knew at some point he was going to be looking for an exit strategy. And I'm 55 and I'm having to start to think about that same thing. But eventually, having to retire. So,
it's a strategic thing for the business owner.
Yeah. But now, primarily we look for partners to the practice to ensure that they're sticking around, because they're hard to replace.
Yeah.
And when you get a good one, you want to keep them.
Yeah, that's amen to that.
Yeah.
So I work by myself.
Yeah.
No, I'm the only one I can tolerate, I guess, at this point. And my wife tolerates me. So yeah, she helps me with our business a little, or a lot. So I guess getting into some of the specifics of what you do on a day in and day out basis. You say in your book you're a rumen enthusiast. So what is a rumen enthusiast?
So the rumen is one of the 4 chambers of the bovine stomach, and it is the biggest chamber, and it is where kind of the magic happens of converting grass that is indigestible to people into protein that is digestible to people, either meat or milk.
Yeah.
And the rumen is very complex. There's layers of ingesta inside the rumen, and the rumen is constantly churning, and there's trillions and trillions of microorganisms and yeasts and bacteria and even little protozoa that swim around that break down these cell walls on the plants, and so that the cow can extract the sugars and the proteins from the cells of the plants and convert it to animal protein. And it's a very delicate ecosystem where if you overload the rumen suddenly with highly fermentable carbohydrates like starch, you can cause a crazy overgrowth of bacteria that kills off a lot of the normal bacteria and make the cow really sick. And if you don't have enough starch for the microorganisms to survive, then the cow can't derive enough energy from the rest of the feed, and it's constantly churning, and she releases a little bit of it at a time to go down the rest of the GI tract, and there's a balance between what's coming in and what the cow's regurgitating to chew or cud, and to kind of break down that fiber structure of the plant even more, and then swallow it and let the microorganisms work on it. And it's a completely delicate balance that works. It's miraculous, I think. And rumen dynamics taught me calculus. I never understood calculus. I had to take a calculus class in undergraduate. Never understood it. To this day, I have dreams about whatever they're called, integrals or derivatives or stuff chasing me down the road. I didn't understand calculus. But when I sat down and read how the rumen works and how these rate limiting steps and rates of change, and that made me understand calculus. It's all about rates of change, and things are always changing. They're coming in, they're going out, they're getting cud chewed, particle sizes are changing. It's absolutely fascinating to me. I'm kind of a nerd that way.
Well, you answered another question that I had for you, which was what was something that you didn't know you would have to learn in order to become a veterinarian? And maybe that's something that you learn. I don't know, but
I didn't know I would have to learn about the rumen.
Yeah.
I didn't, but once I learned how it worked, and I was, I learned how it worked a couple of years out of veterinary school when I started balancing rations for dairy farms, and when you start to go through the process of having to build a ration and having to stay within the thumb rules, and what do you do if you, what happens to the cow if you deviate from these rules, and then you learn pretty quick, that these rate limiting steps are limiting for a reason, and you can screw a herd of cows up if you don't do it right.
and so the better you understand the way a cow digests food, better you understand how to feed her efficiently.
I'm a visual learner. I'm a process guy.
Yeah, me too.
And for me, to do rations at the time, I had to completely understand how the rumen worked. I couldn't just I couldn't work on the theory. I had to understand how it worked. So there's a thick volume called the nutrient requirements of dairy cattle. Some government think tank or academic agency updates it every 5 years or 10 years or whatever. And I had the 1997 version, I think. And I sat down and about read that thing from cover to cover. And that was when I understood the rumen, and that was when I understood calculus. It was...
Well, I don't understand either. So. But I do now understand that it's what makes a cow special. And one of the things I read in your book that you said about cow has to produce enough energy to make the milk for the day, the same amount of energy as it takes for a runner to run a marathon.
Yeah.
And I thought that was fascinating because, I never realized that. Of all the times I put a milker on a cow, I never thought, oh, this cow's running a marathon every day.
If you take a gallon of milk, it's 90% water and 10% solid. So that solid is 1/3 protein, 1/3 sugar, 1/3 fat. So a gallon of milk's 8.5 pounds or whatever. So almost a pound of solids in a gallon of milk. Almost a pound, 3/4 of a pound. Typical dairy cow today will make about 10 gallons of milk a day. That's about 10 pounds of solids. That's crazy.
Yeah.
10 pounds of edible food from one cow in a day. They're freaks of nature.
And I don't think most people realize. I didn't. I've been around cows a lot. That, I didn't realize that fact, that they really are freaks when it comes to the way they produce.
Yeah, and there's herds of cows now that are producing. It's not uncommon to see a herd produce 7 pounds of components a day. Components being fat and protein per cow per day.
Yeah,
which is ridiculous.
Yeah,
what they can do metabolically. They are metabolic athletes. Pure metabolic athletes.
Yeah, and I think the outside perception is probably not that. And when you see a cow, they're kind of lazy, lay around.
Yeah.
But that's necessary for them.
When
to lay
she
around.
is laying around, she is working hard because she is chewing her cud. She is ruminating. She is processing all of that grass, which is corn silage, grass silage, hay. She is processing all that fodder that is indigestible to people. Her rumen is processing it first. It gets absorbed in her bloodstream, then it's got to go to her liver, and then her liver turns it into her liver turns it into the protein, or her mammary gland. Her liver processes it first, and then her mammary gland turns it into the milk fat and the protein, and the lactose is made, I believe, by the liver. Lactose kind of helps to pull the helps to make the milk that pulls the protein and the fat in.
Similar with, what are other What are other animals with rumens? That
So sheep, goats, white-tailed deer are the main ones around here. Moose, bison are kind of a cattle. Um, yeah.
anything exotic that we wouldn't think of, maybe that.
So llamas and camels are kind of pseudo ruminants. They have a three-chambered stomach. They don't have they have sort of a fake rumen,
Okay.
but it functions kind of the same way. Horses do not have a rumen. Horses have they have a stomach like we do, very similar to people.
Okay.
Pigs do not have a rumen. They have a stomach similar to people. Yeah, cows, sheep, goats.
It's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
So, you talk in the book about, when you walk into a doctor's office and you say, my knee hurts, you can help the doctor to diagnose a problem. But the cow can't talk to you. So what's that like, being a vet? You walk up and, obviously the cow isn't saying, my stomach hurts today.
Yeah,
or
so
the calf that, is sick.
The thing that tips off that the cow is sick is that she doesn't eat. Because cows like to eat. And when they don't eat, something's wrong. And for the dairy cow, most of the time that their highest risk is right after they calve, for about 3 weeks, because she's got all of the transition from being pregnant to lactating, and that metabolic strain can be pretty tough on them. It can be tough on their immune system. It can be tough on their metabolism. So farmers watch those cows in the first 3 weeks really close. And when one doesn't want to eat, then if they can't make the diagnosis on their own, then they call us. And it's really around that time, there's one of about 5 or 6 things that it's likely to be. Ketosis, pneumonia, milk fever, retained placenta, and displaced abdomen or twisted stomach. They're pretty easy to find when you just do a good physical exam on a cow. So today I don't do a lot of clinical work anymore, but I have one herd that I still do herd checks for. And after we were done preg checking the cows, the guy said, "Doc, I got a cow that I want you to look at. I think she's not been right for a couple of days." And so I looked at her, took her temperature, listened to her lungs, listened to her heart, listened to her rumen, because the rumen's supposed to move about 1 or 2 times a minute, and everything seemed to be working okay. And if you just keep looking, you're going to find it. So I went around to the other side of the cow, on her right side, and I started checking her for a twisted stomach, and lo and behold, she had a twisted stomach on the right side, which is kind of a medical emergency in a cow. So we made the decision to go ahead and open her up, and surgically repair the displacement, and we did, and we'll know in a couple 3 days if she's going to survive. Those right-sided ones are kind of tricky sometimes.
I've witnessed that, and I couldn't tell you if it was right side or left side, but I remember as a kid, anytime that the vet came to do a twist, I was there and I would watch. Yeah. Or at least if I was around, I would, I was a fly on the wall, and I would watch them pull the stomach basically out, correct?
Yeah, part of it out.
Part of it out, and then untwist it and sew it back up and stitch the various layers together, and it's pretty basic.
I've been at this for almost 30 years, and it still fascinates me that you could make a cow's side numb with some lidocaine and open her up and pull her guts out and rearrange them and sew them back together.
Is she standing most of the time?
The whole time.
The whole time?
Yeah.
Do you ever do them where they're laying down?
Very rarely.
Okay. But that's amazing that they're just standing there chewing their cud while you're...
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you look for the common things, you almost always find it. You don't, not every time, but 95% of the time you can find the problem.
What's mad cow disease?
So it's a neurologic disorder that cattle get. There's two forms. There's a form that they get from eating rendered ruminant protein. So in Great Britain back in, it would have been early 2000s, I believe, maybe late 90s, there was a sort of an outbreak of this mad cow disease out there because they had a common practice of feeding rendered ruminant protein back to ruminants. It bypasses the rumen. It's called bypass protein, so they can get more protein in their diet that way. It turns out that when the process that they were using to render the protein wasn't sufficient to kill the whatever prion organism that they believe causes mad cow disease, and it was cows are basically eating this protein and getting neurologic disease. And it took them a while to figure out what was going on, because some people who had a habit of eating organ meat, mainly brain, of cows, would develop a form of it's called Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease.
So that's how it was getting transferred to
people.
Eating
it was
the
from
organs.
eating neurologic tissue from cows.
Okay.
Very specific way to get it. And there wasn't a lot of people that got it, but it was in the tens or hundreds. Tens of hundreds of people that got this really devastating neurologic disease.
How did it show up in people?
Tremors, inability to walk. Yeah, eventually it mimicked a disease in, I can't remember exactly, but there's a cannibal herd in somewhere third world area somewhere where cannibals would develop it from when they would eat their ancestors' brains. It was sort of an ancestor worship thing. Mm-hmm. And they would develop this CJD, this Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease.
Any relation to chronic waste disease that we see in white-tailed deer?
It's the same. It's the same type of organism. You don't even know if it's an organism as much as it is just kind of an infectious protein. But they don't really know if it replicates or not. But there's, some similarity to that. And we don't believe that eating infected venison causes the disease to transmit to people. But out of an abundance of caution, the Game Commission has tried to limit the spread and recommend not eating deer that are wasting away, which who would want to anyways.
Right. Yeah, stay away from that.
Yeah, but there's probably some similarity, but the epidemiology is completely different. The transmission is completely different. They think it's transmitted by saliva in deer, and in ruminants, or in cattle, it's transmitted by feeding rendered protein back to cattle. Scrapie in sheep is the same infectious prion that causes mad cow disease, and that's kind of how it found its way into cattle, because they would be feeding rendered sheep to cattle, and that's how it really showed up in cattle in Great Britain.
And that's not a common practice of feeding the cattle in the United States that way?
It is expressly prohibited. It is almost, it's impossible to do. Yeah. You can't even render cattle anymore, except for dog food. It's completely, they'll put you in jail for feeding rendered ruminant protein back to ruminants. Yeah. There is a spontaneous form that happens every 3 years. There's a case in the U.S. There's a spontaneous form that just kind of happens, and there's no rhyme or reason. It's just a cow gets neurologic, and now because of the mad cow disease outbreak 25 years ago, any neurologic animal that shows up at a slaughterhouse gets tested. Yeah. And Yeah, every couple years there's a report of one. I think it's been 4 or 5. We're probably due for another one soon. But yeah, it doesn't. It's spontaneous. It just happens, and nobody eats cow brains in the U.S. And there's actually now regulations prohibiting any of the loin meat, like the ribeye and New York strip cut from any animal that's over 30 months old. That has to be discarded at the slaughterhouse. So,
what's your favorite cut of steak?
that part,
Yeah. New York strip.
the ribeye.
The ribeye. Yeah.
That's the best part of the cow. Maybe next to the brisket, but the ribeye is up there.
I've made a couple briskets, not by any means an expert on it, and it's tough to do.
Yeah,
it's tough to do it right.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I'm a steak fan too. I was surprised when I read your book actually that it is a lot about the farmer. It's a lot about the farming culture, and so you talk about the relationship between the veterinarian and the farmer. I guess how that plays into your practice, and they're basically your customers, and if you want them to succeed so that you can succeed, and so that there's many people that are tied into agriculture that you might not think,
Sure.
from the equipment sales to nutrition. But I guess Somerset County, where we live in Pennsylvania, it's a big part of our local economy.
Yep.
So can you talk about that a little bit? And
So yeah, the relationship between especially the dairy farm and the veterinarian is it's a very strong relationship, and I found when I was in Northwest PA doing mixed practice, the relationships that I had with my farm clients were much stronger than the ones I had with the companion animal clients, because you'd see them 1, 2, 3 times a month. Or
yeah,
more
we do a
sometimes.
herd check every what?
Yeah, every 2 weeks, every week sometimes. You get they become part of the family. Very, very tight bond, and which is probably, one of the things that attracted me to large animal. Medicine on cows is it's medicine. Medicine on small animals is medicine, and medicine is medicine. But the relationship with the farmer, I think, is kind of what drew me to large animal. And yeah, it's something special, and it's something really tight. And it was brought home to me, pretty hard a few years ago, whenever I was faced with the decision that I wanted to expand the embryo transfer practice of the embryo transfer part of the practice, which meant me giving up some herd checks and giving them to one of our associates. And I felt compelled to, when I was on my last herd check with these guys, to say, hey, this is my last time here. I'm going to be turning over the reins to Dr. So-and-so. And it was tough. And some guys didn't take it very well. And
hey, you're their guy. You're the one they're used to seeing.
Yeah. And but I had confidence in the clinician I was turning it over to. But yeah, it's a very, very strong relationship. And the dairy, it's not the same in beef, because we don't see those guys except during calving season a lot of times. But with the dairy, you're there every 2 weeks, every 4 weeks, every week in some cases, and you get to know them very well, get to be part of the family.
And so when you get close like that, I would imagine that it's a mutual respect for what and for what they're trying to accomplish, which is healthy cows.
Yeah.
And so you, I guess sometimes you almost have to play a little bit of the good cop, bad cop with farm. I mean, do they say, hey, we got to do better here? Or, is that the case sometimes where you have to give a little bit of tough love to farmers sometimes, where you're like, or maybe does that ever happen?
If I see an area that needs addressed, that they may not appreciate the need, sometimes you have to, subtly say, hey, I think you could make some economic improvements here if you did this.
Yeah.
I think the reason you're seeing so much calf sickness is they're not getting enough colostrum. I think the reason that your cows are getting ketosis after they calve is because they're being fed too much before they calve. And yeah, sometimes they can take exception to that. And you can lead a horse to water, you can't make him drink.
Right.
And sometimes they listen to you, and when they do, that's great. And sometimes it takes a little bit of a train wreck to get their attention. And I'm not one who likes to prod people, and I want them to want to make the change that they want to make. So I'm not going to push anybody to do anything, and unless I see that it's an imperative. But I would, and maybe my career have not been aggressive enough in trying to getting guys to do certain things, but there, there's always on every farm there's a process that happens, and to interrupt that process, to interrupt whatever workflow that happens every day, because every day it's the same thing, and when you introduce change in any system like that, it can be a shock. And if they don't have the capacity to, just out of time constraints, to make changes, sometimes it can be very intimidating, daunting for them to be able to house the dry cows different, or feed the calves different.
I mean, one extra guy might make a world of difference on a farm where you're stretched thin. And I know that was the case for my family whenever I came to help out, was just, hey, can you help out here? Can you help with the calves? And that freed up somebody to do something else where I was able to take calf care off their hands, and I really enjoyed doing that. And I read in your book that's best suited to mothers, and I'm like, what does that say about me? But I really enjoyed that part of it, because I was able to see a direct improvement maybe in calf health care.
And calf health is one of those things that you can see an immediate effect.
Well, how important is calf health care to the longevity of the cow and how she becomes as a milker later?
So there's a lot of evidence that baby calves that don't get fed enough colostrum, that may be deficient in antibodies at birth, don't produce as much milk as 2-year-olds. There's a lot of evidence that baby calves that get pneumonia, that may be pneumonia that's not bad enough for them to act sick, but still lesions in their lungs. When they calve as 2-year-olds, they won't make as much milk as their cohorts.
Okay.
It's imperative that these calves get started out right, for future milk production and their ability to even reproduce once they're in the milking herd.
Feed those calves.
Yeah, there's a lot of evidence that backs that up.
You talked a little bit about how your practice specializes in, or you specialize in embryo transplants, flushing. Can you explain what that is? And like the advances, I guess, technology also. How's technology helped you in that, and where's it going? What direction is what you're doing with that type of stuff? Where's it going?
So I don't know. I just kind of slowly fell into this, and about 15, 18 years ago, I started doing frozen embryo transfers in cattle, just a little bit here and there, maybe 30 or 40 a year.
What's a frozen embryo transfer for somebody that doesn't
know? An embryo is basically a 7-day-old embryo that was removed from a cow who was bred 7 days after she was bred, and cryopreserved in such a way that it survives thawing, and then it can be transferred into a recipient animal who is synchronized to the same heat cycle as the donor. So 7 days from a heat, because the embryo is 7 days old. The advantage, the reason, you'd ask yourself, why in the world would a farmer want to take an embryo from one cow and put it in another? Well, the biggest reason is that a cow can only have one calf of her own a year. And if you've got a really, really, really good cow, and you've got another herd of cows that aren't as good as her, that you could make more calves out of that really, really good cow and put it in the inferior recipient animals. And then
like a surrogate.
And then you can more rapidly improve the genetics of your herd. This technique of removing 7-day embryos from cows they started playing with it in the 1970s. They were able to get it figured out how to do it without surgery in the 1980s, and it became essentially commercially accepted in the mid-1980s.
So when she's bred, is there multiple embryos?
There should only be one.
Okay.
But we can trick her into ovulating multiple embryos by giving her a hormone that stimulates the follicle production. And so, I can do this to a cow as often as every 4 weeks. So if you have a really good cow that's easy to flush, and you can get 10 embryos every 4 weeks, potentially 120 embryos a year, or more sometimes, and you could rapidly, if you do it right, paying really close attention to inbreeding, make sure that your whole herd doesn't become out of one animal. If you do it right, you could rapidly improve your genetics. In addition to that, because these embryos can be frozen, cryopreserved, they become portable, and I can sell embryos to a herd in California, and they can sell me embryos out of a bloodline that I have no access to. Without that, it's much easier for me to ship 20 or 30 embryos across the country than it is to ship 20 or 30 cows across the country. And there's much less concern about biosecurity with them. I don't have to worry about bringing in bovine influenza with a tank of embryos. So there's a lot of really neat advantages to it. And the market is still pretty young, because we're only about 50 years into figuring out what we can do with it. And in the last, say, 10 or 12 years, in vitro fertilization has become in the last 5 years, it has become the predominant method of creating bovine embryos, where instead of taking the 7-day embryos out of a cow, we're taking the eggs directly out of her ovary, sending them to a lab. They do the fertilization in a dish in vitro, and then 7 days, they culture them for 7 days, and then they can either be frozen or transferred fresh on day 7. This opens up a whole different number of possibilities, where we can do younger donors. We can actually, there's a machine that can select sperm cells for male or female.
Yeah, that's we can, incredible to me.
Yeah, if we want all heifer calves out of a donor animal, we can run it through a machine, and it'll sort out the female, the X sperm from the Y sperm, and we can use whichever one we want. If we want all steers out of a cow, then we can use all the Y sperm and discard the X sperm. We can do that on pregnant animals, and without risk to the fetus. So if a guy has a pregnant cow that he wants to generate more offspring from, even though she's currently pregnant, we can do that, as long as I can reach the ovaries.
Yeah.
And it's become pretty big business. It's very specialized. There's not a lot of us that do it. There's
And you do it in other states, correct?
We do it in West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Ohio, New York, Maryland.
So you get around.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty incredible, and I'm like, it makes me wonder if humans adopted this technology to create football teams yet or not.
Yeah.
It makes you look at some of these teams, you wonder. People seem to be getting bigger.
So, the Chinese, maybe 5 or 10 years ago, it was somebody leaked that they had genetically modified a human embryo or some human embryos, which is really scary, scary stuff. Is. And the technology exists to do it in bovines, and it's been done in bovines in a research setting. But to think about doing that in human embryos is crazy scary.
It is scary, yeah. Especially, it depends on who you're copying, I guess.
Yeah.
But so, how important is the majestic cow to our local economy? And then maybe and I'll point out a fact that I found. So when it comes, like what you just said about the embryo transplant, I did a little research, and the most expensive cow in the world is valued at $4 million. She was in Brazil.
Yeah.
And then the most expensive Holstein in the world is in the United States at $2 million. So I can't imagine trying to extract some eggs and how valuable that would be, and the pressure that you would be under to make sure those ETs live.
I wonder who the most valuable cow is.
I looked it up. I didn't write down her pedigree, but I guess I don't know if she was sold.
That was an auction price.
I couldn't tell you if it was the auction price or if she was just valued at that.
Okay.
But I showed her to my kids, and they thought she looked pretty.
She was a cow or a calf?
Cow.
Okay.
Yeah, cow.
I probably don't know her.
It's 465,000 cows in Pennsylvania. This was as of January 1st, 2024. Cows in the United States, 9.36 million. California had the most at 1.7 million.
Dairy cows.
Dairy cows, yes, correct. And then in Somerset County, we're right around 12,500. Is that about right?
That sounds probably pretty close, okay. Yeah.
One thing that I thought was pretty interesting was, I don't know if I wrote this down. Oh, yeah. Number of farms declined by 39%, but production increased by 5%. Yeah. Is that just because cows are more efficient? Or how does that happen?
Some of that is there's just more cows per farm.
Okay.
But, yeah, cows are way better, way more efficient today. That herd I was at this morning, the guy was giving me numbers about the number of beef cows in the country. And in the 1960s, I believe, there was something like 27, 28 million beef cows in the country. About 15 years later, it climbed to 37 million beef cows, mama cows, in the country. And then today there's about 27 million beef cows in the country. But in 1960 or whenever, there was 27 million beef cows in the country. Beef production has about doubled since then.
Because they're putting more meat on it.
They're growing faster, they're bigger framed, yeah.
And that's genetics.
That's a lot of genetics, but a lot of management too.
Yeah.
Farmers know more about the cow. They know more about how the rumen works. They know more about how to keep calves alive, so that they can market them at the right time. They're growing faster. Calves are today, so they finish quicker. But yeah, there's probably twice as much beef produced today as there was 50 years ago with the same number of cows.
Wow. And so, I think the statistic in your book was like 2% of the population are farmers.
Yeah, that might even be high. now.
And we're feeding the rest of the country.
Yeah.
How does that? So that's pretty fragile. That comes off as like a pretty fragile thing.
Yeah.
And do most people realize that? Do you think?
No. It's a blessing and a curse.
Yeah.
It's a blessing in that we have capacity for people to become whatever they want. They don't have to worry about growing food because they know a farmer's going to do that. It's a curse because they don't ever get to experience what it actually takes to raise food, and they don't really understand how potentially tenuous our food supply is.
Yeah.
And we see that today with the avian influenza outbreak and what it's doing to the supply of eggs.
Yeah.
And few people understand why eggs are whatever, it was $7, $8, $9 a dozen at the store, whatever they are. Nobody understands why that is, but there's a lot of chickens being killed right now because we don't want this to spread any further than it has to.
Yeah. So if you have chickens at your house, you're golden.
Yeah.
And we did for a while. And we've always had chickens since I lived out here. I got a little barn in the backyard where I have 2 donkeys, chickens, a little mini pig, which Dan treated. So Dan does we have a little petting zoo, and Dan was out from your practice and did our health checks.
Okay.
So, but yeah, anyway, something killed a fisher or a mink or something got in, or raccoon milling around in there and killed all 6 of my chickens.
Bummer.
So now we're paying for eggs, but 6 chickens was enough to feed a family of 5.
Sure.
So we're going to start fresh again in the spring because I didn't want to raise them through the winter. But I don't know how hard it's going to be to get peeps in the spring either.
It's probably, well, yeah. I mean, I don't know. It might be difficult.
Yeah.
Somebody asked me today why the price of chicken meat isn't going up, the same as what eggs are.
Yeah, it's a good question.
And I don't really know. I mean, I could speculate that the time it takes to raise a layer chicken from egg to actually laying is
longer.
Yeah, 8 months. The time it takes to kill a broiler is about 12 weeks.
Yeah,
if that.
Do you think? Talking about the public being educated, I guess. Do you think that our school systems, public education, does enough to educate kids on where their food comes from?
Well.
And do you think it's their place to educate them, I guess?
Maybe not. Around here, where you about have to drive past dairy farm to get to school.
Yeah, correct.
You'd hope that there'd be a little bit of a natural curiosity. I know that the VOAG programs offer that, and they do a good job. And we have a lot of involvement with high school kids and even pre-high school with the 4-H and the FFA. It's kind of part of our culture here. You get into the cities and even the suburbs, and should they be educating them? I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of torn. Very few of them are ever going to work in agriculture because, man, it's just work. Sometimes it's work. The kids around here that know it, they love it. They don't mind doing it. But man, you're going to be hard pressed to find somebody from, Mount Lebanon to go into agriculture.
Right, but it doesn't mean they can't know where it comes from.
Sure.
or appreciate, I guess, where. And it may be hard to appreciate where it comes from unless you have been there, done that. I mean,
Yeah,
I guess you don't know what you have until you don't have it anymore, that type of thing.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of people should appreciate a lot more stuff, period,
Yeah.
than, I appreciate agriculture a lot. Obviously, my livelihood depends on it. My relationships are ground in it. But I think there's just a lack of natural curiosity anymore. Maybe not. Maybe that's pessimistic, but I think that people aren't just as curious as they maybe ought to be. about a lot of things.
Yeah.
Agriculture, science being, a couple of them. I think a lot of our culture today is ignorant of science and what science really is. You heard a lot of that during the pandemic, right? Trust science, trust science. Nobody knows what science is. I mean, science is discovering new things. Science is rarely settled. Science is trying to rule things out, trying to prove, not prove a negative, but trying to hypothesize and then trying to disprove a hypothesis. And science is rarely settled. And things that I thought that I knew when I graduated vet school were proven to be wrong many times.
Is that the reason they call it a practicing?
It's practicing. Yeah, it absolutely is. And the whole vaccine debate, during COVID, just it just wanted to turn my stomach, because nobody on either side knew what the hell they were talking about.
Yeah.
It was sad to follow. And the whole epidemiology around the COVID outbreak was sad to watch, because there was very little of it that made any sense at all from somebody who understands epidemiology, because it's beat into our heads in veterinary school.
Yeah.
Man, they really screwed some things up, a lot of things up. So yeah, I mean, I think I would like people in the suburbs and the cities to appreciate agriculture more, but I think I would like them to appreciate a lot of things too, and just understanding how science works is being one of them. I think we'd all be better off.
Do you think you have to be naturally curious to do what you do?
Yes, you have to be. If I wasn't naturally curious, I don't know why I would drag myself out of bed at 2 o'clock in the morning to go put a prolapse uterus back in a cow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you talk about that in your book too.
Yeah, I mean, it's you have to have natural curiosity, and natural curiosity. No matter what you do in life, if you have a natural curiosity, you're going to enjoy your job.
Yeah. I always tell my kids to ask a lot of questions.
Yep.
I said, because you don't know. And then when they ask me something, I get agitated that they ask me, you told me to ask you questions.
I remember, it was a long time ago, I had a client that brought in a sick calf or goat or something. We were doing something on it in the office, which is unusual for us. We usually do everything on farm. And their son was with them, and he was about 6 or 7. He kept, well, why do you do this? Well, why do you do that? Well, why do you do this? Why did you do it this way? And the mom was like, shut up. I'm like, no, don't.
Yeah.
Let him ask. Let him be curious. Curiosity is a great thing. I don't mind explaining it to him. Let him ask, because that's gonna pay him dividends someday. And yeah, natural curiosity that unfortunately is lacking.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how you, if it's something you're born with, natural curiosity, or it's something that even can be taught. But I've always been curious. I've always asked a lot of questions, no matter what job I've ever done. I wanted to know more about that. Like, what are you doing? Why are you doing it?
Yeah.
What's, farming was like that. I asked a lot of questions. You guys were always good for asking questions. You taught me how to treat my own calf with IV in the neck.
Yeah.
If I let it go, if something wasn't right, if we had to do that, but you should, how to.
And that was for my
back.
benefit too, so I didn't have to get called out at 2 o'clock.
Yeah,
in the
I
morning.
live closer, so yeah, it was to your benefit too. But and I think that's probably why I'm doing this. It's because I'm naturally curious.
Yeah.
I'd like doing all kinds of different things. I'll never get to do them all. But I could sit and talk with somebody about what they do,
Sure.
and maybe get some of my questions answered. But so how did the column start? And what, because you're a vet, you're a business owner, among many other things. And now you're an author. So how did this come about?
Literally, it came about because of natural curiosity. I was on a flight to Chicago, and it was a real windy day, and we take off, and planes bouncing around, and I'm sitting next to this lady, and you can kind of see the look of terror on her face, and so I struck up a conversation with her. Said, kind of a bumpy ride, isn't it? She said, oh yeah. She said, I got to go to Chicago for a trade show. She says, I'm in electrical components or something. And she said, what do you do for a living? I said, I'm a veterinarian. I'm going out for a conference. And her eyes got real big. Veterinarian. She said, I got a dog. And I was like, let me stop you. But I really only work on cows. She said, there's veterinarians for cows? So the whole way to Chicago, I mean, it's like an hour and a half flight. I explained to her what I did and the importance of cows to our society and farms and everything. And she was just absolutely amazed and couldn't get enough of it. And I thought, there's more people like that. There's people in my hometown that are like that. I wonder how it would fly if you had no pun intended, if you had a column in, weekly column in the newspaper. So on the flight back, I had my laptop with me and I penned one out. And had a slow week next week, and I wrote 2 more, 500-word articles. So I knew the publisher, Daily American, Andy Bruns at the time, and I emailed Andy and I said, what do you think? I said, could this fly? And he said, well, first, you need to send us some examples, and it need to go to the editor. So he gave me Brian Whipke's email address, and I introduced myself, and I attached 3 columns of the email. And he said, how often do you want to do this? I said, once a week. He said, that's really ambitious. I said, let's give it a try. He said, okay, we'll start next week. So,
and when was this? When did this start?
2009.
Okay.
Yeah, fall of 2009.
And you did that for how long?
My last article was, I think, June or July 2021. Yeah, so about 12 years almost.
That's awesome. Once a week for 12 years.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, there were times where I just couldn't get one in, but towards the end, I was starting to travel a lot with the IVF work, and it was just getting really hard. And then they changed hands and get at bottom and everything, and things got a little funny.
Yeah.
So I kind of backed away.
Yeah. And then when did you write your first book?
That would have been 2018, maybe. It was just a compilation. And, the Daily American was very helpful to me. They actually published it. It was a compilation, and I did it the way I wanted to do it. And, excuse me. And, it was great. I did book signing things, and sold some books, and the Daily American sold a bunch of books, and and then I was at a book signing in my hometown, and this gal walked up, and my first book was Oops, in other words you don't like to hear your surgeon say, and she picked it up. She said, oh, my brother-in-law is a book enthusiast, and he helps people self-publish books. Can I buy this for him? I'm like, yeah, and give him my card. I might want to talk to him about a second one. So he called me the next day, Jason Liller, and he helped me put the Majestic Cow together. And so it's my writing, but he arranged it in such a way that it told a story. Mm-hmm. And he was the consummate professional. He said, what do you want to accomplish? I said, I want people to understand, what farmers go through. I want people to understand, how a cow works. I want people to understand. I had a list of 7 objectives. And he met every one. Like first draft. It was incredible. And so we we tweaked it. It took us about 6 months to back and forth editing and add this, take this out, and put this in. And I had to write a couple of new material for it, a little bit of new material for it, but it came out really good.
Yeah.
And then we started doing this before the pandemic, and then the pandemic happened, and I couldn't do any book signings, and I couldn't market it.
No.
And then 2 years basically, and by then it's been released. I released it in spring of 21, so we're like a year into the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just became really hard to market. And I had big plans, and I was going to speak at a bunch of shows.
Yeah. Well, you still should, because the book's really good. And I'm not just saying that. Like, I think it does a very good job of that. And I think people can get a great appreciation for the cow, the farmer, and the relationship that they not only have with you, but with so many other people that are tied into agriculture. But yeah, I thought it was a great read.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It may be the definitive book on cows.
Yeah.
Because there isn't really another one out there.
Yeah, I learned a lot, and I read that book as we cruised across the new Gulf of America. So your book was on the ship. We took a cruise, and
yeah, still available on Amazon.
Yeah, well, I got it at Rob's Rations in New Centerville or in New Lexington. But yeah, anything else you want to go over, Bill?
No, I'm good.
Yeah,
I'm good. Sit here and chat for a while if you got other questions. Or
I wanted to make sure that you got a chance to tell folks about your book, and you did that. Oh yeah, I have a couple that way. Are you doing what you imagined you would be doing whenever you were a kid?
No. I imagined I'd be a professional soccer player.
I know your kids played soccer too, right?
Yeah. This was the furthest thing from my mind.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's not funny.
Yeah. and I didn't really knew what I wanted to do until about 10 years ago when I started doing embryo transfer work. So
yeah.
Who knows in 10 years what I'll be doing.
I am open-minded because if you'd have told me that I'd have a podcast set up in my den even 2 or 3 years ago, I would have said you're crazy. And my wife would probably vouch for that. She's like, you're whatever. She's supportive, so I appreciate that. But, what would you tell your 18-year-old self today?
Gosh. The world doesn't revolve around you. And buy Apple stock.
What was the last one?
Buy Apple stock.
Yeah, if we all could have.
Yeah.
What's the new stock to buy? Like, what are we telling 18-year-olds to buy now?
I wish I knew what the new one was. Yeah.
Do you understand crypto at all?
I know that it's a thing.
Yeah.
I don't know how it works.
Me either. So maybe we can
it
have somebody
scares
on
me.
who can explain it to us.
Yeah, it scares me. I think some Russian mobster is going to find a way to get my Bitcoin if I ever owned it.
Do you think that there's something that the new administration can do for farmers that hasn't already been done? Like, Trump likes to think outside the box, and so I think it's good to think outside the box. Are farmers looking outside the box for things that can help them?
Farmers are very, a lot of them are very innovative, and the problem with farming is that everybody is selling a commodity, and you are absolutely at the mercy of whoever else is producing the same commodity and who is purchasing the commodity. So, the federal government's policy has always been that the country have cheap food, and that comes at the expense of farmers making money, because cheap food makes for a happy citizenry that is very unlikely to revolt, which is sound government, I guess. Yeah. But we're blessed in this country with a huge land base and very fertile ground and very good technology and very hardworking farmers, and they've come through on their promise of providing cheap, wholesome, affordable, plentiful food. But it's a commodity at the end of the day. So how do you how do you help farmers? I think probably by staying out of their way. Um, you know, land ownership, and unless somebody is hurting their neighbor, a guy should be able to do with his land what he wants to do with his land. Water rights in California are a big deal, and they ought to be able to figure out a way for farmers to farm, because that's some really fertile ground out there, and those guys ought to be able to farm. But what can Trump do? I think probably stay out of our way, and let us do our thing. I'm pretty libertarian when it comes to that type of thing, and I think a lot of government subsidies, especially, tend to poison the well, because when you throw money at something, when you subsidize something, you create more of it. No matter what it is, if you subsidize farming, you're going to make more farmers, and they're going to make more food. It's going to drive the price of the commodity down.
Right.
You almost have to let it kind of play out. Now, there's times where we have to provide a backstop to make sure there's still farmers, like the crises that happened in the late single early 2000 or 2008-9 as a result of the financial collapse. There should be backstops when really bad things like that happen. But if you want to poison a market, subsidize it. So I think if he just stays out of the way, opens up our trade markets. That's when he was in office in the last time, he worked really hard to open these markets with tariffs, and then they kind of backfired for a lot longer than what I think he anticipated, and it really screwed with the price of commodities then, and the export markets were hurt, and a lot of farmers are very understanding that it sucks now, but we have a goal. We want to open up these markets. We want to be treated fairly. I'm not a tariff guy. I'm not a free trader guy. I don't know anything about it. I just know that that these markets will help us to sell our commodities. There has to be a market for this stuff, and if he can negotiate better terms for our guys, that would be a good way for him to help farmers. But pretty much, kind of stay out of our way.
Yeah, right. I agree with that. Probably the same viewpoint. Less is more, maybe.
Yeah. I'm really excited. I wasn't a big Donald Trump fan this first term. I mean, he's just abrasive, and couldn't never really get his policies going. Pretty good manager, some of the things he did foreign policy wise, but now he's going in there slashing and burning, and he's doing things that conservatives have been talking about for 40 years that couldn't get done, and he's getting them done. Yeah, like now, getting them done, and
he means business.
Yeah, and it's kind of exciting.
I just saw today that there's a mugshot. His mugshot's hanging in the hallway outside the Oval Office. It's framed, hanging there. It's a daily reminder.
That's funny.
I saw that. I don't know what Doge will find in the Department of Agriculture.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know.
I'm not really. There'll be some waste, fraud, and abuse there.
Yeah, right.
Which
should be eliminated. Clean it up, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, we work hard for our tax dollars. I think everybody should have to pay their taxes quarterly or. Like a business owner does, so that you realize how much you're paying. Because when it comes out of your paycheck, you don't really understand it, just how much is going. But when you write that quarterly check, it's a real eye-opener how much of your money really goes to taxes.
Yeah, my wife, she writes the checks out, and I'll look at the account balance every once in a while on the phone. What the hell happened to my...
tax.
IRS, okay, well, that explains it.
Yep, you think you're doing great until you write that tax check out.
Well, I remember it was maybe 10, 12 years ago, we had finally, I mean, veterinarians out of school don't get paid a whole lot of money. I mean, we were poor for like 5 years. I mean, poor. wonder where I'm going to get enough money to buy food for. I always was able to do it, but you wonder, are you going to be able to make that next, month? And after we moved to Somerset County and struggled and bought house for $40,000 and in town and lived in there for 5 years and kind of remodeled it and everything and just kind of scraping along. And my wife was she raised kids, so she didn't have an income, and finally bought this house out where we live now. And I saved up a little bit of money, saved up like $8,000 that year, and my wife and I talked about it. I said, okay, we're gonna fix the kitchen up. We've been wanting to do this for a while. And finally saved up a little bit of money, and in the middle of April come along, and I got the bill from the from the accountant, $8,000 I owed.
Yeah.
Like, what's the point?
Yeah.
Why do you bother? What's the point? And that was when I learned about tax shelters and IRAs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When I talked to another business owner one time. I said, I always think I'm doing great. Then when it comes time to write that check out. But you have to be disciplined. When you own your own business, you have to be disciplined to put that money aside.
Yeah, and we didn't do quarterlies that year that we had to pay the $8,000. We had to pay the quarterlies next year. It's just, there's no escaping it. I mean, it's, and then they tell you don't pay your fair share.
Yeah.
Bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I don't know. I feel like I pay my fair share. So, I guess, how, you're a man of faith, so how has that affected what you do for a living?
Yeah, so, I'm on a journey just like everybody else, and, the older you get, the closer you get to your last breath, and faith, I think, naturally becomes more important to a person the older they get. And it's, it grows every year. We actually had a Bible study meeting the other night, and I was thinking, we were talking about Matthew 22, the wedding feast parable, and I don't know what made me think of it, but I kind of had this revelation, when I was just in college or just out of college. I was raised Catholic, kind of always Catholic, never really fell away, but never was really too serious about it. And I was in college and just out of school. I thought, I'm a good person. I go to church every once in a while, throw a couple bucks in the collection basket. I'm really good to my friends. Got a relationship with God. I'm a good person. I'll be all right. And the older you get and the more you learn about your faith, you realize, the older I get, I realize how much of a wretch I really am. I'm and how much you need a savior.
Yes.
Because there ain't anything I can do to save myself. I mean, there ain't anything I can do, and you come to that realization eventually where you kind of have to lean on what Jesus did for us, and it encompasses profession, family, leisure. It should encompass everything, and it's easy to forget because we live in a land of plenty.
Yeah.
It's really easy to forget, and so it takes some work to keep reminding yourself of that.
Yeah.
And it takes some work to remind yourself how much He loves you every day, because it's pretty easy to take for granted, But yeah, it's a journey, and I'll God willing, someday I'll see Him face to face, but I'll never understand it until I do.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I heard a pastor say one time, he was a pastor in Aspen, Colorado. Mm-hmm. He said, try telling a bunch of people from Aspen that they need something else, and it's like, okay, I understand. That always stuck with me, that they, but yeah, you hit the nail on the head. There's nothing that we could do to save ourselves, and there's nothing so, you're not too good that Jesus didn't die for you. There's nothing too bad that you've done that he didn't save you, that he wouldn't save you from.
There anything you can do to make him quit loving you.
Yeah.
Nothing you can do to make him quit loving you. Now you can reject that love. You can say, I don't want it.
Do you find most farmers are people of faith?
Yeah, I think most of them are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a humble nature, knowing that you're kind of not in control. Somebody else is in control.
I think you almost have to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I said, animals are evidence of God's providence. Well, so is putting a seed of corn in the ground and watching it grow over the next 5 months, and to be able to harvest it, be utterly dependent on rain and warm temperatures, and hailstones not falling from the sky to ruin your crop. That we can grow food is utterly miraculous to me. It's providential.
Yeah.
And I think that farmers are really close to that, because they can see that now. Yeah, they have to do the work. They have to participate with his providence. But it doesn't happen without his rain. It doesn't happen without his sunshine. It doesn't happen without his dirt.
Yeah.
It ain't gonna happen. But I think farmers are really close to that, and I think it's we live in a land of plenty, but farmers help provide that land of plenty for us, and I think that they have an easier time at seeing that.
Yeah. Well, you do a good job in your book of talking about an appreciation for the farmer, and I appreciate that, because I grew up on a dairy farm with a family of farmers. People did a lot of hard work and sacrifice for me, So I appreciate that. I hope other people pick up The Majestic Cow and get a copy.
There's still some copies up at Rob's.
Yeah,
yeah.
Still a few copies up there. But yeah. Sleep on me.
Need a cough button.
There's probably one on here. I just don't know how to use it yet. Why are we dark? Well, and anyway, Dr. Bill Croushore, I appreciate you coming on the Route 281 podcast. It's a new thing. You were first guest. And, when I wanted to do this, you were one of the first people that came to my mind as a guest. And you were the first person I called, and you were the first person that accepted. So I appreciate that.
I'm absolutely honored.
Yeah. Well, thank you for doing it. And, if this guy's on your farm, well, then you're in good hands.
All right. Well, I appreciate it.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah.